Well, I'll back up a little bit, and I'll back up even more. And so I got like three stories here. One of them is that the first thing I ever wrote for publication in a major magazine was, interestingly enough, about a pandemic. It was a very short article for the New York Times Magazine about collapse in beekeeping in honeybee populations that was happening in the 90s. And it was not the colony collapse disorder that came later. It was, I don't remember if it was varroa or tracheal mite. Anyway, it's a pathogen that that swept the nation very quickly. And I pointed out that the way beekeeping was done was a recipe for was a perfect situation to create this some pandemic, which is you need bees in concentrations to pollinate, and so to pollinate monocrops. And there are basically the world, most of the world's supply of almonds is from basically around Modesto, California. And so you get, I don't know, 500,000 or 1 million or 250,000 or some huge number of hives are brought there to pollinate, because the almond growers will pay the beekeepers quite a bit of money for just 3 weeks work of moving bees in and out. And so there's a huge concentration there. And that's, if you were a pathogen trying to create a perfect situation to propagate, you want to pack your intended meat in tight. So if one hive has a pathogen, it can jump to the next hive really easily. And then after almonds are done, you move around to oranges or cherries or whatever it is you move to, and then eventually you take your bees up to, say, North Dakota for the summer. Meanwhile, other beekeepers in North Dakota were taking their bees down to Florida for the oranges for the winter. And so what this means is your pathogen has been able to jump from one hive in Modesto to another, to another, to another, and then move up to North Dakota, where it jumps into another hive that next year is taken down to Florida, and there it jumps into another hive that during the summer is taken up to New York. So you've covered the entire country within a couple seasons, within a season and a half, within a year and a half. And so these conditions are just absolutely perfect conditions of packing your intended meat intended food into a tight place, and then giving that great mobility. And is this sounding familiar at all?
Yeah.
And so I'm actually surprised that we haven't had just pandemic after pandemic. It's frankly a miracle that there haven't been more, because you can have one person gets it in, where we won't even blame China for this, even with the wet markets and everything. We'll just say one person gets it in New York City, we don't care, and then they're on a plane to Berlin, and on the plane they have interactions with all these other people on this recirculating air system, and then they land in Berlin, they shake hands with 15 different people, they all go to 15 different countries. You've been able to move a pathogen not in a year and a half, but you've been able to move it in a day and a half all around the world.
Yeah.
Extraordinary system. So that's one thing. Second story is the moment. So I was just sort of paying peripheral attention to the whole thing in Wuhan, and then the moment I started really paying attention was when 2 days after they locked down Wuhan, a Hyundai plant in South Korea shut down. And the reason they shut down is not because of the sickness, but because it used to be, and if you know my work, you know that I don't want to keep industrial civilization going.
Yes.
But if one were going to keep industrial civilization, if one were going to keep an industrial manufacturing facility going, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, one would have, say, a month's worth of parts for whatever it is one assembling. If it's a car facility, you've got all the parts for a car. You've got like a month stacked up. So if there's some bad thing happens, you can keep going. But it ends up that that's a waste of a lot of money, because basically because you keep a rolling inventory, that's a month's worth of parts that you have the money spent on that is never coming back to you, because you have to buy new parts with it. It's keeping too much inventory. They realized that with instantaneous shipping, with instantaneous communication through computers, instantaneous shipping all this fast global transportation, that it was a much better use of their money to only have what's called a just-in-time system, where you only keep the inventory on hand to be able to operate, in this Hyundai plant's case, for 2 days. And on the good news for them is that this frees up a bunch more money that you can spend on cocaine, I guess.
Yeah.
The bad news for them is that you don't have an insurance policy, because that inventory was a 1-month insurance policy. And so people have asked me if there was one lesson. I mean, if there was really one lesson I wish people would learn from the pandemic, it's that we've overshot carrying capacity. This is going to happen again and again, and nature is saying cut this out.